Greetings, and thank you for jaunting with us today. In just a few moments, you'll be led into the jaunt chambers.
Hello and welcome to another Marvelous video. I'm your host, Will. We here at Marvelous Videos just love Stephen King. We have entire playlists on him and his works, and in this video, we're gonna go over one of his short stories. We're gonna get into the facts about The Jaunt. Let's get to it. When I first read The Jaunt, I remember randomly getting up and going for a walk just to get some fresh air. Yeah, Stephen King's 1981 science fiction horror story is that suffocating. The Jaunt does not rely on a conventional monster or ghost to scare you, yet it remains one of the most horrifying pieces of literature King has ever written. He takes a story about technological advancement and soaks it in ambient psychological horror. The idea gets under your skin so effectively that you may find yourself struggling to breathe by the end. I am not exaggerating. Those who have read the story, give me a cheer in the comments. So, what is The Jaunt about? The story takes place hundreds of years in the future, where teleportation between Earth, Mars, and other destinations have become a routine part of human civilization. The process is known as jaunting, but there is one essential condition. A human being must be unconscious while they pass through the jaunt. If somebody enters the process while fully conscious, the result is worse than any normal nightmare. Let's just say they'll have a very long time to think about their mistake, if you know what I mean. As insane as the story is, you may be intrigued to learn that there are several equally fascinating facts behind what eventually appeared on the page. So, without any further delay, let's examine 10 mind-blowing facts about The Jaunt. The story was rejected by a famous science magazine. If you think you're the unluckiest person alive because one of your applications was rejected, remember that even the king of horror has been turned down. Believe it or not, The Jaunt was rejected by Omni, the influential American magazine devoted to science, science fiction, futurism, and paranormal subjects. Omni was published by Bob Guccione and Kathy Keaton beginning in 1978, and its print edition continued until the 1990s. Stephen King originally submitted The Jaunt to the magazine. According to King's own account in the notes accompanying Skeleton Crew, the editors rejected it because the science was not convincing enough for their publication. King acknowledged that the objection was fair. Although the story contains teleportation devices, experimental physics, planetary colonies, and discussions about the nature of consciousness, its real purpose is psychological horror rather than hard scientific accuracy. After Omni turned it down, the story found a new home in the June 1981 issue of the Twilight Zone magazine. It was later collected in King's 1985 short story collection, Skeleton Crew. That rejection now seems wonderfully ironic. The scientific details may not have satisfied Omni, but the central horror concept became one of King's most enduring short story ideas. The Jaunt received advice from a legendary science fiction writer. I'll let you take a wild guess and write the name in the comments. Done? Alright. It was none other than Ben Bova. If you're a fan of science fiction, you may know Bova for his extensive body of novels, short stories, nonfiction, and the interconnected books commonly known as the Grand Tour series. Bova wrote or edited well over 100 books and served as editor of Analog Science Fiction and Fact before becoming an editorial director at Omni. He also served as president of both the Science Fiction Writers of America and the organization that later became the National Space Society. When King submitted The Jaunt to Omni, Bova was connected with the magazine's editorial operation. According to King's recollection, Bova offered useful criticism even though the magazine did not purchase the story. One suggestion concerned the importance of water for extraterrestrial colonies. King incorporated the idea into the story's background, where jaunting helps humanity transport water and other vital supplies to settlements beyond Earth. So even though Omni rejected the jaunt, the encounter was not entirely unproductive. A major figure in science fiction helped King strengthen one of the practical details supporting his imagined future: the reason behind using the word jaunting. If you are deeply interested in science fiction literature, you may have read Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination. Bester was one of the genre's most influential writers and won the first Hugo Award for Best Novel for The Demolished Man. The Star, My Destination first appeared in serialized form during the 1950s and was later published as a novel. In some countries, it was released under the title Tiger Tiger. Within Bester's story, jaunting refers to humanity's ability to teleport through mental concentration. The power is named after the fictional scientist Charles Fort Jaunt, who accidentally discovers the ability. Stephen King deliberately borrowed the term as a tribute to Bester. In The Jaunt itself, Mark Oates explains that the name used for teleportation came from Bester's novel. The systems in the two stories work very differently. Bester's characters possess an innate psionic ability to teleport over limited distances. King's characters pass through machines capable of moving matter almost instantaneously across enormous distances. The reference is therefore an homage rather than a claim that both stories occupy the same fictional universe. King's connection with Bester was personal as well as literary. He encountered The Stars My Destination when he was young and remembered reading its serialized publication in Galaxy Science Fiction. That influence clearly stayed with him. King later referred to the novel again in Lisey's story, where it is identified as a favorite book of the fictional writer Scott Landon. Aww, that's a Stephen King fanboy moment I did not expect. The Jaunt almost received screen adaptations. Between films and television programs, there is an enormous number of Stephen King adaptations available to audiences, but several of his stories remain unfilmed. The Jaunt is one of them. Why has such a famous story never reached the screen? Its short length might seem to make adaptation easy, but that may be exactly what makes the task difficult. King packs an enormous amount of history, philosophical horror, family tension, and world building into a relatively small number of pages. A filmmaker would need to expand that material without explaining away the mystery that makes it frightening. In 2015, Andy Muschietti and his producing partner Barbara Muschietti became attached to a film adaptation developed through Brad Pitt's Plan B Entertainment. Andy Muschietti later explained that the story was difficult to expand into a feature-length narrative, although he believed the project's team had found a possible approach. He said, "It's tough to crack because it's such a great short story." The project did not move into production. In 2021, another adaptation was announced for television. David Erickson, the co-creator of Fear the Walking Dead, was reported to be developing The Jaunt as a series through MRC Television. He was expected to write, produce, and serve as showrunner under his overall arrangement with the company. But no finished program emerged from that announcement either. As of July 2026, no film or television adaptation of The Jaunt has entered public production or received an official release date. That doesn't necessarily mean every proposed version is permanently dead. It means the story remains trapped in development limbo, which is almost too appropriate for The Jaunt. Let's hope that whoever eventually adapts it understands that the story's greatest horror comes from what cannot be shown or measured. David Lowery also tried his hand at The Jaunt. David Lowery, the filmmaker behind The Green Knight, A Ghost Story, The Old Man and the Gun, and Disney's Peter Pan and Wendy, also attempted to adapt The Jaunt. His effort was separated from the Muschietti's publicly produced Plan B project. While appearing on the Kingcast, the Stephen King-focused podcast hosted by Scott Wampler and Eric Vespe, Lowery revealed that he had personally approached King about adapting the story. Lowery prepared a short treatment of approximately 2 pages. Stephen King read the proposal and approved of Lowery's approach. However, Lowery's schedule became increasingly crowded. He committed to Disney's live-action Peter Pan and Wendy, and the amount of time required by that production meant that he could not give The Jaunt the attention it deserved. The adaptation rights eventually moved elsewhere. Lowery explained that he still hoped he might have another opportunity to return to the story in the future. This demonstrates how difficult the material is to hold onto creatively and commercially. Several accomplished filmmakers have recognized its potential, but none have yet found the combination of rights, scheduling, financing, and narrative expansion necessary to bring it to the big screen. The Jaunt also appeared in an adult magazine. King is well known for connecting stories and expanding fictional worlds, as seen in works associated with Jerusalem's Lot, Castle Rock, and especially The Dark Tower. The Jaunt, however, has remained almost entirely standalone despite its popularity. Very few readers know that after appearing in the Twilight Zone magazine, the story was also printed in an adult publication. In December 1981, The Jaunt appeared as a separate pull-out supplement in Gallery magazine. Gallery was an American adult magazine established in 1972 rather than 1970. It belonged in the same broad market as publications such as Playboy and Penthouse, although it maintained its own editorial identity. The Gallery appearance was not the story's original publication. Its first publication had already occurred in the June 1981 issue of the Twilight Zone magazine. The December Gallery version was a subsequent magazine appearance before the story was eventually collected in Skeleton Crew. Original copies of the pullout have since become collectible pieces of Stephen King publication history. Brad Pitt's production company controlled the film project. Although The Jaunt has repeatedly been described as difficult or even impossible to film, Brad Pitt's Plan B Entertainment took a serious interest in adapting it. Plan B became involved with the rights around 2015 when Andy and Barbara Muschietti were attached to develop a feature film. At the time, the company was run by Brad Pitt, Dee Gardner, and Jeremy Kleiner and maintained relationships with major studios and production partners. Plan B has a strong history of supporting ambitious films, but even its involvement could not solve the central challenge of The Jaunt. The project needed to expand a compact short story into a feature without weakening its horrifying final revelation. In 2019, Andy Muschietti said the project remained in development at Plan B and that the team had found a writer they believed could finally crack the adaptation. After that, public information became limited. A television adaptation involving Dave Erickson and MRC was announced in 2021, suggesting that the rights or development approach had changed. No reliable public announcement currently confirms which company controls the adaptation rights in 2026, so it would be inaccurate to say Plan B definitely still owns them. The project remains unproduced, and its present legal and creative status has not been clearly disclosed. Part of me would love to see the story adapted for film or television. Another part wants to preserve the integrity of the horror King created on the page. Showing the Jaunt's timeless void too clearly would make it smaller, and nothing about that void should ever feel small. Fans argue that King delivered his scariest moment in one line. The most horrifying moment arrives when young Ricky Oates secretly holds his breath while the anesthetic gas is being administered. He wants to remain conscious during the jaunt because his father's stories have made him curious about what the process feels like. When the family reaches Mars, Ricky emerges alive, but catastrophically changed. Although the journey has lasted almost no time for everyone else, Ricky has experienced an immeasurable subjective eternity while trapped inside the jaunt. His hair has turned completely white, his eyes have changed, and he has clawed at them in terror. Then he screams the phrase that has haunted readers for decades. "Longer than you think, Dad!" The original script included Ricky's full speech, but the shorter line is enough to preserve its impact without reproducing an extended copyrighted passage. That sentence captures an eternity of horror in only a few short words. Ricky explains that he held his breath because he wanted to see what happened, and he did see or experience something. But the story never gives the reader a detailed map of another dimension. Ricky does not leave behind written notes explaining that he existed simultaneously at the starting point and the destination. Nor does Mark discover a precise description of an indescribable alternate reality where all physical laws have collapsed. What King establishes is more terrifying because it remains less specific. A conscious mind appears to spend an almost infinite amount of subjective time in a featureless transitional state. The human body reaches its destination instantly. The conscious mind does not experience the interval in the same way. With no external stimulation, no escape, and nothing to mark the passage of time, Ricky's mind is destroyed by what feels like eternity. That is the central nightmare of the jaunt. The danger is not necessarily a monster waiting inside the transportation system. It is consciousness itself, left awake for longer than it can endure. The Jaunt contains one of King's most disturbing subplots. The Jaunt includes a deeply disturbing anecdote about a man who uses the teleportation system to dispose of his wife. He doesn't simply push her into the ordinary receiving portal while the system is operating normally. Instead, he manipulates the machinery so that she is sent into the space between two active jaunt terminals without a functioning destination capable of receiving her. Her physical body disappears into the process. Whether she technically dies, remains conscious forever, or continues existing in some unknowable state cannot be proven. That uncertainty becomes part of the legal case. The husband's defense attorneys attempt to argue that he cannot be convicted of murder because nobody can demonstrate that his wife is dead. There is no body, and the jaunt has made her physical condition impossible to verify. But that argument does not save him. The authorities and jury recognize that he deliberately condemned her to a fate that may be worse than ordinary death. He is convicted and executed. This story does not show the woman suspended visibly in a catatonic state, nor does anybody observe her continuing suffering from the outside. What makes the incident frightening is that no one can retrieve her or determine what she is experiencing. She may have vanished instantaneously from the physical universe. From her own conscious perspective, however, the fall might never end. This subplot expands the horror beyond Ricky's curiosity. It demonstrates that once humanity learns that consciousness experiences the jaunt as an eternity, the technology can become an instrument of torture unlike anything previously invented. The story uses a framed narrative structure. King structures The Jaunt largely as a story within a story. The present-day action follows Mark Oates, his wife Marilis, and their children, Ricky and Patricia, as they prepare to jaunt from Earth to Mars. While they wait for the anesthetic procedure, Mark explains the history of teleportation to his children. He recounts the experiments of scientist Victor Carun, the discovery of the Jaunt, its use on inanimate objects and animals, the first human tests, and the expansion of the technology throughout the solar system. Mark deliberately presents parts of the history in a controlled and family-friendly way. He wants to satisfy his children's curiosity without frightening them immediately before they undergo the procedure themselves. At first, this storytelling structure relaxes the reader. Mark is a father explaining familiar technology to his kids. Jaunting is treated almost like boarding an airplane. Billions of people have done it successfully. The danger appears manageable because everyone knows the rule. You must be unconscious. But Mark's anecdotes gradually reveal why that rule exists. Animals remain alive, but emerge abnormal after being sent through while conscious. Human volunteers who attempt conscious jaunts return insane, die, or become incapable of describing their experiences coherently. A criminal then uses the technology to condemn another person to a possibly endless void. Each piece of information foreshadows what Ricky will eventually do. The frame narrative gives readers the same false sense of safety experienced by the family. We trust Mark because he understands the technology and has made the trip before. We also understand that he has withheld the most horrifying details from his children, but he tells them enough to make Ricky curious. That is the tragedy. Mark's explanation is intended to reassure his son. Instead, it gives Ricky the exact idea that destroys him. The story becomes even more haunting when reread, because every anecdote points towards the final revelation. The ending does not suddenly introduce a new rule. It fulfills the warning that has been present from the beginning. The jaunt is shorter than an instant for the body. For a conscious mind, it's longer than you think. Alright guys, that's all for today. The Jaunt is one of my favorite Stephen King short stories, and it deserves far more attention. As far as a screen adaptation is concerned, let's hope it receives one someday, and that Hollywood understands what it's doing, because this story is scary as hell. Until then, I hope these details make you more excited to read or reread it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next one. Bye!